I worked really, really hard in the audition. I don't think I've ever worked harder in any other for preparation for this audition. I ended up having to, because it was a one valve bugle, I had never seen one, and they're not available to the public. What I ended up doing was taking my trumpet, turning it upside down, and using my thumb to play the first valve.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Everything Band, a podcast that features conversations with composers, conductors, and performers of music for winds and percussion. My name is Mark Connor. I'm a composer and educator, and each week I have the great fortune to speak with and share the stories and wisdom of musicians and leaders in the band community. Before we begin, I'd like to thank all of you for listening. I really appreciate your time, and I hope that you are finding value from these interviews. I rely on word of mouth and social media to bring the show to new listeners. If you think you know one or two people who might find these interviews useful, please let them know about it. You can also help by following me and sharing posts on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Everything Band is sponsored by Celtic Horizon Arts, the leading tour operator for the arts in the United Kingdom and Ireland. Celtic Horizon Arts hosts bands, orchestras, and choirs from around the world, and they are now taking inquiries for their 2020 Band Festival in Limerick, Ireland. This festival, featuring composer Johan de May, will include clinics, masterclasses, and cultural exchanges. Bands and individual musicians are all welcome to participate and can find out more by contacting Keith Kelly at keith@CelticHorizonTours.com or find out more on Facebook at Celtic Horizon Arts. Now, on to the episode. Hi, Francis.
Hey there, Mark. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for joining me. I'm really happy about this interview.
It's a complete honor for me. Thanks for having me.
So can you tell the listeners who you are and why I might have called you?
Well, my name is Francis Franqui, Staff Sergeant Franqui, and I'm with the United States Old Guard Fife and Drum Corps, and I am a bugle musician with this group. We are stationed in Fort Myer, Virginia, and that's in Arlington, Virginia, and we're one of the 4 premier bands in the United States Army.
Right, the 4 bands being the Field Band, the Pershing Zone, you guys, and I'm missing the 4th.
And that would be West Point.
Oh, the West Point Band, of course.
Absolutely.
Excellent. So now you are in the Old Guard Fife and Drum Corps, and we're going to come back and we're going to talk about that and what that means and what the significance of that unit is. But before we do that, I know that you have a background as a trumpet player. Can you kind of tell us your origin story and how you got started?
Absolutely. Actually, I am originally from Puerto Rico, and I moved to Florida around the age of 11. And in Puerto Rico, there's a lot of salsa bands, merengue bands, and obviously lots of trumpet, high note trumpet playing and all that kind of stuff there. I always knew that I wanted to play an instrument. I just didn't know which one. I was kind of partial for the saxophone, really wanted to play saxophone. When I got to Orlando, Florida, they had already started the school year, and unfortunately I missed the saxophone auditions, and the choices that I had was trumpet, euphonium, and tuba. And Mr. Skip Perry, who was my middle school band director at the time, let me try out all of them. And after playing a low C, a G, and a middle C on the trumpet, he said, "You know what, Frankie, you're going to be a decent trumpet player one day." So I was like, okay, that sounds good to me. And I actually stuck with it. And I guess 31 years later, I am here playing trumpet for a living. And it's been quite a ride so far.
Yeah. Do you, so I know that we talked just very briefly. So do you have what was your high school like? What were the teachers like? And what made you decide? Do you remember the moment perhaps when you decided, I'm going to do this professionally, I'm going to go study music?
Oh, absolutely. I went to Cypress Creek High School in Orlando, Florida, and it was a brand new program, brand new high school. And our band director was now Dr. Steve Davis, who's at the University of Kansas City, Missouri. He was a young band director at the time and has always been incredibly passionate about music. I remember joining in 9th grade, and we show up for band camp, and we start getting at attention and dressing the forms and all this things, foreign terms that I was completely unfamiliar with. And I thought I was joining the Army at the time. I thought I was just going to sit down and play music. And turns out that, the marching band thing became a big part of my life and obviously the high school career. But Stephen Davis really focused more about in the concert program, and really his passion was so infectious that the whole band really bought into what he was trying to do. He rehearsed us hard. He worked us hard, and his standards were always higher than any of our wildest expectations. And we were able to create quite a bit of good music while we were there as a young band of mostly Latino members. And really, I think it was around my junior, senior years when I started really taking it seriously. And I started thinking of it as more of a career path. Even though I wasn't completely sure, my parents really wanted me to be a doctor or a lawyer, just like every other parent does. I had a couple of moments where it really moved me to play music. And one of those was we were rehearsing my senior year, rehearsing Music for Prague 1968. And Steve Davis, in order to put the program together and to help us all out, decided to invite Karel Husa in to work with us. And that rehearsal was just so incredibly intense and special, not only because of the way he rehearsed the piece, but the stories that he told us and how he inspired and really got music out of us. That's when I said, this is something that I really, really want to do. I want to be able to inspire kids and be able to change their mood and to change their outlook in the way they approach music, the way that has happened to me. And from there on out, I decided to take trumpet more seriously. Went to school at University of Central Florida and decided to go into the music education track. Became a high school band director, did that for 7 years, and later on decided to join the Army as a musician as well. And here I am now with the Old Guard Fife and Drum Corps. It really has been a very rewarding career, and I intend to continue until I can't do it anymore, basically.
Oh, that's cool. So you mentioned that to me that you were in DCI?
Yes, absolutely. I actually marched the Magic of Orlando at the time. It's actually a small drum corps from Orlando, and since then it has folded. But I've also taught many different drum corps, including Teal Sound, Boston Crusaders, the Santa Clara Vanguard, Carolina Crown, and both in brass staff and visual staff. And that was an incredible tool to have, because later on I decided to audition for the Broadway show called Blast, which is, the roots are from drum corps as well, from the Star of Indiana. So having all those tools under my belt really helped me with the audition for that. And I ended up touring with the group with Blast for about 4.5 years. Did a full tour of the United States and Canada and Japan with them. And I was very fortunate to be around that type of relentless mentality that you have in the drum corps world, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Francis, this is a pretty impressive list of things that you've done. Where did you go to school as an undergrad?
I went to the University of Central Florida in Orlando, Florida, where when I first got there, I was actually a physical therapy major because I was still following my parents' dreams at the time. And there was nothing wrong with that. They really wanted different things, and they were good things. But I found myself my freshman year auditioning for every music group that they had at the university, and kind of putting the physical therapy stuff on the side. And eventually, by my second year, I decided to switch to music education. University of Central Florida was actually a really great place for me at the time. It was very challenging. I studied under John Almeida for trumpet and Lyman Brody as well. And both of them challenged me in very different ways. The psychology and mental part of the trumpet, as well as the technical part of the trumpet. And I had a lot of great professors there, to include Ron Ellis, Dick Greenwood, and a few others that really made a big difference in shaping me up for a successful career after college, for sure.
Cool. So did you go right from college into Blast, or did you do a master's or anything like that?
No, I never got to do my master's. I actually went from college into working for Disney as a musician for a little bit. I did the student program there, and later on, right before I graduated at UCF, I took the audition for Blast, and I did 4 years with Blast, and which I thought out from there on out, I was gonna. There was an opportunity for the cast to be in Reno and do a sit-down gig there. Sit-down meaning where the whole cast is in one place for a long period of time, and I figured I could finish my undergrad there and in Reno. However, that fell through, and once all the touring got done, 4.5 years later, I went back to UCF and I finished my undergrad there.
Well, let's talk about the Old Guard and what you're doing now, because this is pretty exciting. This is, as you mentioned, one of the top groups. And so let's kind of talk about what the group is. Can you kind of just give maybe the elevator pitch about what the Old Guard Fife and Drum Corps is?
Absolutely. Well, the Old Guard Fife and Drum Corps is a unit that is very unique to the U.S. Army and any of the military branches that we have. Our instrumentation is very different. We have fifes, we have drums, snare drums and bass drums, and we have bugles. And since we have bugles, we're actually the only unit or fife and drum corps in the nation that has bugles, and I think internationally as well. Our main mission really is to do ceremonial support to the Military District of Washington, the National Capital Region, and to do any kind of goodwill ambassador type of mission anywhere as far away as Europe, Australia, Canada. We just did Norway last year. Really be the face of the Army and keepers of the roots of American military music. We also support the president and in different ceremonial aspects, and that includes inaugural parades, full honor arrivals for dignitaries, anywhere from the chief of staff of Japan, which we just had recently, all the way to the Pope. And we've been doing that since 1960 is when our drum corps was actually founded. So we do many different missions, from shows to tattoos, lots of ceremonial. My most honorable job, I feel, part of my job would be to play taps all over the Military District of Washington and Arlington Cemetery. And as well as some of the chamber ensembles that we have, like the historical trumpets and flutes and our modern trumpet ensemble. All of those go out and do a lot of community outreach, go out to different universities, and we try to make sure that we keep the integrity and keep the life of this super important American music that seems to be not as relevant now, but in the pop world or anything like that, we try to make sure that it stays alive, and we keep the complete root and integrity of the music.
Yeah, it's I'm the son of a history teacher, and I've said this before on the podcast. I've had several guests who are historians, and they're mostly the two guests I've had. One was a pre-Civil War brass band expert, and the other one was a turn of the century scholar.
Right.
And so this goes back before that. And so I'm a little bit interested in the history. And now Colonial Williamsburg has the Fife and Drum Corps, and we know that the Fife and Drum Corps tradition remains alive, and especially in the Northeast and New England, where I grew up. And so what was the purpose of the Fife and Drum Corps in the military during the colonial or revolutionary period?
Yeah, basically, we are not reenactors of the time. We actually, for us, is to preserve the first line of duty of these musicians that at the time were basically communicators. We communicated commands from the main officer, the commanding officer, to the troops. So the fife was used to communicate across a long span of a field. If you ever listen to a fife, it's a pretty loud instrument, and you can hear it as far as a mile away. So there were different commands that were done by fife and drum. And as Civil War era and all that started coming up and technology started getting a little bit better when it came to building instruments, the bugle was actually introduced and that was used as well as a communication device. Anywhere from traditional charge to getting the troops to attention, to getting the troops up in the morning, to getting the troops to go back and have chow, or to getting the troops to do anything was usually done by a specific musical command, which to me, I really feel that is one of the most special things that soldiers back then had to learn all this music. Really, if you were in the infantry, you actually had to know exactly what musical command would get you to one place to the other. And that was all done by the Fife and Drum Corps. Most of these musicians were all young, smaller civilians that were too small, too young to fight. So they ended up taking these younger civilians and teaching them by rote most of the time, how to play a fife, how to play a drum, and then later on the bugle.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting that the transition away from the fife and drums to the bugles and the brass band of the Civil War, that must have happened in the early part of the 19th century.
That's correct, and really, as the technologies advanced, the Fife and Drum Corps started kind of going away, and it wasn't used not just for communication, but it also was started to be used for entertainment for the troops. And again, it was kind of like the start of seeing the face of the Army at the time, and its military components, where these bands that were in the military started becoming a little more advanced. They were able to have different instruments, and so the music also became a little more interesting, and they were actually were able to go out into the community and entertain the community, but mainly to give the soldiers the will to fight and win and help them with that morale. And as the instruments became more advanced, then the music also became a little bit more fun, more interesting, I should say.
Yeah, this is cool. So I wanted to ask just one last question about the history. So now I know the Old Guard, the Fife and Drum Corps, was founded in the 50s. Is that correct?
1960.
1960. But the 3rd Infantry Division, the name of the Old Guard is it the oldest unit in the Army?
It is the oldest unit, oldest regiment in the Army, and that's why we're part of it, because we are actually representing that era. It goes all the way back to 1784, and that's why our uniforms are actually patterned after those soldiers that were in General George Washington's Continental Army at the time. So you will see that those, if you ever come out and see one of our Twilight tattoos, our Continental Guard will be there that look exactly like George Washington's Continental Army, where they had the blue coats with the red facings. We actually have the complete reverse colors of that, which are the red coats with the blue facing. And that's not to look like the British Army or anything like that. Every time we go to Boston, we get a couple boos here and there. But really, it was so the commanding officers could tell apart the infantry versus the musicians. It was easier to see in the battlefield, red against a blue coat. We can tell where the musicians were. Now, at the time, there were other militia that fought for the Continental Army, and they had different uniforms. They would have a big blue coat with the yellow facings, for example. So in reverse, the musicians will have a big yellow coat with the blue facings instead, or the blue facings.
Yeah, and of course, in that era, it was often the units, even within the British Army, they weren't all red coats, right? Some of them had different colors depending on where they were from, if they were the Lancashire Rifles, or I'm just making that up, but
that is exactly right. And what kind of clothing and was available at the time as well. The clothing was actually scarce at the time. There wasn't a whole lot of materials to just furnish for the soldiers, and whatever was available was used, and they try to keep it as uniform as possible with what they were able to find at the time.
I know you guys aren't reenactors, so I don't want to imply that, but I love the fact that you're keeping this tradition alive of the fife and drum. I know that it happens, the communities are doing it, and that the Colonial Williamsburg, of course, has theirs, but I love that the United States Army has this unit.
I completely agree with that. I think it's very special, and it's something that will continue to stay relevant because we keep it as classy and elegant as we possibly can. We try to make sure that it is as true to, including to the number of buttons that we have in our uniform, as true as it was back then in the 1700s.
So I know you already touched on the red facing, and I know that, or the red coat. I know that people ask that question as I watch YouTube videos. The other criticism I see often is the left-handed salute that the drum major does. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. We are actually the only unit in the Army or any military branch to be able to salute with the left hand. And the only person in the Corps that's allowed to do that is our head drum major, or the drum major in front of the Corps at the time. The reason for that, and actually I wasn't quite familiar with this either when I first joined, back in that era, the commander of the Corps, or the commander of the musician, would stay in the backside behind the musicians, and he would hold the S-pontoon, which is a big weapon with a spike, I guess, in the top, made out of metal, that you can use to stab the enemy. And he would stand in the back and issue commands while holding the S-pontoon on the right hand. Because of that, he was the left hand was available for him to salute anytime that a commanding officer will walk by or such. What we were told, though, by General Milley, an Army Chief of Staff right now, is that he also used the S-pontoon to keep the troops in line. He used a spike to poke them in the back and make sure that they're actually doing the right thing while they were in formation. Nowadays, the S-pontoon and the salute is still done with the left hand. We are still the only unit to do that. And the drum major is usually in front of us, and he issues all the commands silently using the S-pontoon. And different positioning, different ways that he actually pumps the S-pontoon, signals us to do different things when it comes to the drill and the marching that we do, as well as starting and stop playing different tunes and different parts of our shows.
So, Francis, this is really great. I like the historical stuff, but I want to talk to you about some of the insights into your rehearsals for my listeners, many of whom are band directors or know the traditional rehearsals that we all sort of grow up with. What is it like for a rehearsal of the Old Guard?
Well, our rehearsals are often led in a group level where the fifes meet together, the bugles meet together, and the drums meet together, and they get their music and some of the drill. They work it up together before we meet as a corps. During these rehearsals, it's very similar to a sectional that you would do in a college level type of sectional. If you're a jazz band or a wind ensemble rehearsal and your trumpet section gets together, that's kind of the way it runs. We go through the music, we make sure that all the articulation, the dynamics, and all that stuff is done to as true to the arrangers and composers' intent as we possibly can make it. Really detailed, and attention to detail is really key for everything that we do. These rehearsals are usually about anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour long, and then we put it together as a corps if needed. Usually once a year we have a corps-wide rehearsal that lasts about a week, and those rehearsals we actually work on marching, some of the lesser things, not lesser I would say, but less frequent things that we do. We work on drill, we work on leg height, we work on the way we do the troop step, and we work on parts of the small team show and the standard show, which are two different size shows as well. During this time, it's way more focused and way more detailed than we would do on a regular day-to-day basis. When we do a full corps rehearsal, however, we usually focus on lining everything up, making sure that everything is actually gelling together, just like any wind ensemble or orchestra would do. We do a lot of start and stop. And recently, I've actually become one of the official, I guess there's not an official title, but a director of music when it comes to rehearsing. Since I was a band director before I joined the group. It comes very natural to me to lead a rehearsal, and I've been able to work with a full core. And to be honest, I treat it just like I would my band. That kind of rehearsal where we work on a phrase, we work on just making shapes into the phrases. We work on make sure the blend and balance is good between all the sections, and really to make sure that the overall product is as close to perfection as we possibly can make it. Because we are on the spotlight all the time, and nowadays everybody has a phone, everybody has ways to upload to YouTube almost instantly or Facebook Live. We have to make sure that the integrity of the music and the product that we're putting out is always as close to perfection as we possibly can make it. So the rehearsals are short, but very intense. That's for sure.
So a bunch of questions pop up in my mind as you talk there. One is I didn't realize you were a band director.
I was, yes. I was a band director for 7 years before I joined the Corps.
Oh, wow. In Florida?
In Florida, I was an assistant band director at Oviedo High School in Oviedo, Florida. And from there, I went on to become an assistant director at Winter Park High School in Winter Park, Florida. Later on, I got a head band director job at Lake Howell High School, and I did that for about a year, and then they called me back at Winter Park High School, and I stayed there for the next 3 years after that as the head director at Winter Park High School. So been around the block a little bit, but it was all shaped me up to my experiences now for sure.
Absolutely. So I'm going to ask you, because I want to ask you about the audition process a little bit later. I want to kind of keep digging into the rehearsal, though, before we
Please, yeah.
If that's okay. And I also want to ask you about the instruments and the historical stuff about the instruments themselves. But let's talk about the marching. So I know, your drill is exceptional. And you mentioned the troop step, and that's something that's unique to the Fife and Drum Corps, the old guard?
It is for the music groups. Yes, absolutely. I've seen other marching units that do the troop step. The troop step is actually really a British tradition, a European tradition, not just British. But we adopted that from the British Army, and we've actually kept it going. And most of the time, we use it to honor the colors or to honor a dignitary. So, for example, anytime we do a White House mission, and we do a pass and review or a sound off, we go around, and when we come back towards the dignitaries, we start the troop step. And the troop step is a very unique type of step where we kind of go into a halftime feel. We plant a foot, and the other foot comes out in front of that one, and we hold it about 1.5 to 2 inches off the floor while playing our music into the next beat. So every other beat, a foot comes out, and we leave it there while we're trying to play and march. It's definitely tricky to figure out at first.
Toes pointed too, right?
The toes are definitely pointed, and everything is as a long line from all the way from your hip to your toe to make it look as elegant as you possibly can.
It really looks cool.
Oh, thank you.
It really is cool.
We work on it quite a bit.
I bet. I'll make sure I link a video for the listeners. Anyone who wants to check that out can see it.
Most definitely.
Yeah. So how about the historical instruments? I know you use the rope drums.
Yes.
And you use wooden fifes. And I know that I guess I read somewhere that they're made especially for you guys.
That is correct. They're actually made out in Norway for us. And we have an instrument maker out there who does both our fives. And I think it's a different instrument maker who does our Baroque trumpets. Our bugles, our current bugles, are actually made here in the United States at Canstel Instruments, and which are specifically made for us. Let's start with the fifes. The fifes are wooden, and I believe they are 10-hole fifes. And these are, I believe for the fifers is the best way and the closest way to play in tune with everybody else. They're actually tuned to 442, while the trumpets, or the bugles, I should say, are tuned to 440. So we have to adjust to match the bugles all the time. Just like you said, we have handmade rope tension drums, and our bugles are actually a one-valve bugle. It's not a traditional no-valve bugle. When we first started in 1960, the soldiers that were actually in the Fife and Drum Corps were infantry soldiers. Most of these guys and gals, I think at the time they're probably all guys, but most of these soldiers did not have any kind of musical experience. So,
oh wow!
And at the time, the one valve bugle did not exist. So as we have evolved and the need for more interesting parts of music and also the talent level has really risen in the past so many years, the need for more interesting music has definitely been in the forefront of the musicians. So they decided to come up with a prototype of a one valve bugle. Now this bugle is in B flat, just like a regular trumpet would be. You would play the valve with your thumb, your right thumb, actually, which was, and I'll tell you a little more in the audition process how I figured that out. Basically, we play a lot of the music's in the key of B flat and F, and the minor keys associated to that, just so we can. There's only so much you can do with a one valve bugle. Obviously, all our bugle calls that we do for regular Army ceremonies and are incorporated into our music are usually open valve bugle calls, just like we would play in a natural bugle anywhere else. The fifes, like I said, are wooden 10-hole fifes, and they're able to play the full chromatic spectrum, which is a lot of fun for them, and we're very jealous as buglers.
I'm sure.
So, and the drums, I believe, because they're rope tension drums, they really get a very distinct sound out of them. I see them all the time having to re-rope the drums and having to redo, pretty much taking them completely apart and redoing them from scratch all the time, just to keep and maintain that distinct sound that we get on the field.
It's as I mentioned earlier, I remember that as being a kid watching the Mattatuck Fife and Drum Corps walk by on the Memorial Day parade, and just that's such a visceral thump that those, especially the bass drums get, because those heads have less tension.
Yes. And the bass drums also use wooden mallets. They don't use a regular mallet that you would use in a marching bass drum in a drum corps or a high school band or a college band. It's an actual full-size wood mallet. So you get that a little bit of extra thump for sure. We feel it every day.
I love it. I guess I don't hear it every day, but I love it when I hear it. So that's pretty cool. This all this stuff, these period instruments. And I know that you have some chamber groups that do some period chamber music as well.
We definitely do, actually. So our historical music ensembles are actually, they're one big ensemble, but they also do separate things. So we have historical flutes that are in the tradition of 19th century flutes. At the time, some of them are a little longer than others, so you get a little bit deeper sound. And they incorporate that with fife music as well. They do all kinds of different missions and gigs all over the military district of Washington and nationally as well. We also have the Baroque trumpets, which are basically a natural trumpet, and they're done. They have different sizes on those as well. And of course, we have percussion that goes with that, which is a traditional snare drum and timpani. And depending on the literature that they're playing, they change that up as well. The drum group they do a lot of their own thing, where they do different missions where they only need drums, and they do a lot of, even though they're doing rope drum music, they incorporate a lot of the modern sticking and modern flair to it, which I think is a pretty cool thing. And all these groups, when they get together, they do period music, solely period music for the particular mission or show or concert that they're doing.
Mm-hmm. I noticed I was looking at the pictures here as you're talking, trying to see kind of looking at the pictures, trying to visualize this. And I noticed, do you guys use the keyed trumpets that like Haydn had? You know, we have the idea that Haydn had that keyed trumpet when he wrote his concerto.
Everything that we have is open hole. For trumpets, I think they have a few, but I think they've actually kind of the last so many concerts that since I've been here, I've only been with the group for about 3 years, and they've actually done an open hole trumpets, very Baroque, early classical era trumpet, and those are all made in Europe. All those trumpets.
How are those to play?
They're a bear. They're not easy. That's for sure. We have some fantastic trumpet players. A lot of them grew up playing those back in their hometowns and colleges. And when they got here, it was easy for them to transition to that. But all those guys that do play, and gals that play in the historical trumpet group also play with the bugle group. They do that as an additional duty, I would say. The same with the historical flutes and the drum group. They all play in the full corps scenario, not just in the historical ensembles. But they are tough to play. They do a lot of trills, lip trills mostly, and they take a while to learn. I know that I have there's at least 2 new soldiers are working on it right now, and they've been working it for at least, I would say, 6 to 8 months, and they're starting to sound really good now. However, they're still not qualified to play with the group full time. So it takes the process to get into a historical group. It usually takes about a year of training to make sure that it's up to the standard of the rest of the group.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you, as I look at pictures, I have all these questions. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's great.
I mean, one of the things that we're familiar with when we look at pictures and we see pictures of, say, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, you guys wear the wigs. We
do. Absolutely. And the wigs are definitely part of the uniform. We have the tricorn hat, which is also part of the era of that time. However, the wigs were usually worn by the officers.
Oh,
so this is kind of one of the few things that are not true to what the soldiers would have been wearing.
Mm-hmm.
But we do it just to keep uniform with the Continental Guard and to keep uniform with the rest of the Corps.
Mm-hmm.
We wear the wigs as part of the uniform. When we do the historical groups, depending on the mission, they wear just the wigs, and sometimes they just wear nothing at all. They just they don't have any tricorn or wig on at all. It depends on what kind of mission it is.
Cool. All right. And the leather collar is interesting too.
Yes, absolutely. That's actually part of the original uniform. That was actually put there to help the soldiers keep composure, to keep them awake, and to keep their necks and their chins up while they were out in battle.
Oh, wow.
To make sure to, these guys would march for humongous distances to get to a battle. They were exhausted, sometimes not fed well. And the last thing that at the time they wanted is for them to look weak as they were going into battle. So part of the uniform was a neck stock to help their necks stay up. So we kept that. Ours is definitely a little shorter than what they would wear back in that era. Just because we play wind instruments and it would be really tough to breathe with that on. But that is a really integral part of the uniform. And actually, I think it looks really special and it looks really good on the uniform.
Yeah, it's cool. I'm just perusing your website as we talk, and it's just fascinating. There's so much on this website that's here to check out. You have all your different groups and your performance capabilities. It's just amazing.
Thank you. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, okay. So we talked a little bit about your rehearsals, and I just wanted to ask, I was struck by your history. You were a band director, you were in DCI, and now you're in the Old Guard. And so marching has really been a part of your life.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you learned after getting the Old Guard that maybe someone at a high school level might want to share? Or has it just been sort of a continuation of the same?
Well, you know what? When I came in, I definitely had that drum corps mentality, and I thought it was going to be a straight leg march, straight. We're going to have backwards marching and all kinds of things like that. And actually, it was not anything like that. Our marching style is supposed to be comfortable to the player as well as elegant. They describe it as an elegant step. So basically, anything that was snappy or just fast and like hard hitting like you would in a drum corps field. That I had to put that aside and like really forget and relearn to make everything smooth yet elegant. So sometimes we move our horns up to a carry position and then a playing position. Those are still fast and has a stop motion in between the beats. However, it's not a snap. You still want to take all the time in the world to get there and back. And being a band director, if I were to go back to those days and reteach marching band, which I teach some of the local marching bands here in Northern Virginia, I look for that elegance now more than I do for just snap into hit hard and hit quick and hard into the movements. I like the elegance better now, and I might be biased because I've been in the group for 3 years now, but I think it sets you up to play in a fashion where tension does not come into play. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
So anytime that we do any kind of movement, it's still fast and still strong. However, everything is very loose and comfortable in your upper body. And the marching style as well is we focus a lot on phasing and making sure that our feet are hitting exactly on the beat with our music, instead of making sure that the legs are completely straight like I would have done in a drum corps situation. So it's definitely not a walk, like you would at the mall or a park. There's a little bit more regiment to that, but it still feels really comfortable to the player as you're playing a show, and especially when you're doing the high mark time type of things where you have to separate your lower body and upper body to a certain extent. It still feels pretty comfortable compared to a drum corps style.
Yeah, I know you can't speak for other military units, but is the Marines, they're the only ones that have a drum corps style? A DCI style?
That's correct. Yeah, they actually have a full drum and bugle corps, which still plays in G bugles, which I find super special and great. As just like the original DCI drum corps would do. When I marched drum corps, I marched in a 2-valve G bugle that was actually made out of chrome. It wasn't the funnest to play, but these guys actually have top-notch bugles, and they're all key in G, and they do just like a DCI drum corps would do, where they do full field shows in a football field with all kinds of drill. They do the backwards marching. They do different things that was very traditional of the, I would say, early to late 90s drum corps. So basically drum corps with all the choreography that's in there right now.
Do you have much, this is just a side question, do you have much contact with the other DC musicians, the other?
Yeah, absolutely. We see all the other bands all the time, especially when we do the White House missions.
Yeah, I see the Marine Band a lot.
Yeah, we get to see Marine Band a lot. We see the Drum and Bugle Corps every so often. TUSAB, which is the United States Army Band, they're right down the street. Some of us have been lucky enough to fill in for the field band when they go on tour. They need an extra trumpet player or a flute player. We fill in with those guys. West Point, we don't see as much. But however, we have done gigs in the past with the Hellcats that they have a very similar group to what we do, but they use piccolos instead of fifes, and they use a keyed trumpet basically for what they do. It's a different type of bugle, but it's not a valve. It's almost like a rotary valve type of situation. So we get to see those guys a lot. Right in the MDW Military District, Washington area, the Air Force Band is there. Anytime they do any kind of ceremonial mission in Arlington, we see those guys as well. The Navy Band is close by. So yeah, and of course all the community bands and orchestras are manned mostly by military band members. So we have a really good relationship with all those different bands and different branches.
Cool. And so you mentioned Arlington. I know that you do you guys do most of the taps out there?
Actually, the United States Army Band trumpets are the ones that usually do most of those. Part of their mission is to do the daily taps missions in the Tomb of the Unknown Soldiers and anything that's any burials in the cemetery. We do play in there occasionally, but it's usually for regiment, the 3rd Regiment or the battalion, 4-3 Battalion that we are part of. Anytime that there's soldiers that were buried there or any kind of celebration or anniversary of a former battalion or regiment member, we are the ones that go out and do those missions. As a matter of fact, last week I did a Tomb of the Unknowns TAPS mission for a former 4-3 Regiment Master Sergeant McConnell, I believe was his name, who used to be in the regiment. They did a wreath laying for that, and I had the honor to play at the tomb for that. So they do, those missions do come up quite a bit, but definitely not as much as the United States Army Band trumpets, which are there basically every day.
Now, the United States Army Band, that's the Pershing Zone.
That is correct. Yes, sir.
And then the field band's a different unit.
Yes, the field band actually do most of the touring. The Pershing Zone does a lot of the ceremonial and concert band plus choir and strings here in the military district of Washington. The field band actually goes on tour and they become the face of the Army music. I believe they tour a good majority of the year, and it's a really fun but tough assignment because they're constantly on the road.
And I looked at the website, and as I see, you have a Fife audition coming up. And I was going to ask you about your audition experience, and then perhaps there's a flutist listening who says, I want to do that. What would that be like?
Well, the audition consists of 3 rounds. The first round is usually, actually, even before you get here, you submit a tape. And if you look on the website, it'll tell you exactly the materials that you're going to need to play. You do not need to do this on Fife, and you do not have to have experience on Fife to do this. The same with the bugle audition. As a matter of fact, I've never even played a bugle before my actual audition. But you take the material that's there, you submit a tape, and the leaders here look through all the applicants, and if you have met all the requirements in that round, they call you back and they fly you out and they put you up for a 2-day audition. And in this 2 days, there's various rounds. The first finals round would be they have usually around anywhere from 6 to 10 finalists, and you have to do a standing test where you have to stand at attention and colonial at ease for 30 minutes because a lot of our job is standing. And if you have problems with that, physical problems with that, you're not going to be able to, unfortunately, join the group. But once you get through that, you'll be asked to play some of your own material on the fife or the bugle, and depending on the audition. Some of your own prepared works, as well as some of the prepared works that were on the list. The auditions are very laid back compared to any audition that I ever taken before. We really try to make the performer feel comfortable and let them play as well as they possibly can. Set them up for the best success that they can have. So I feel like everybody's really friendly and very laid back when it comes to hearing you play, which I think is a really special and great thing about our auditions. Once you get through that round, you will be asked to pick up a fife or a bugle for the first time, and they want you to play some of the material that is, at that point, you're going to be sight reading, or there's some other material that was actually on the list, but you will have to play it on the chorus instrument, so the fife or the bugle at that time. Once you get done with that round, then you are able to play with the section and see how you blend in and play. And as you join the section, you will be doing some sight reading on that round as well with the section, as well as some prepared material that you will get at the audition, and you'll have some time to prepare. There'll be a little bit of marching and playing, but the biggest part of it is definitely the playing. We can always teach you the marching and teach you the style, but the playing has to be on point. The final part of the audition is an interview in front of anywhere from a 6 to 8 person panel, and they will ask you questions about yourself, about your upbringing, about things that led you to become a musician, and that led you to today, which is your audition day. What got you here, basically? They will ask you about your intents as a musician, your goals. They will ask you just different things to really get to know you. So right when you're done with that audition, they usually pick a winner, or if they feel that they haven't found the right fit for the drum corps, they pass, and they will have another audition, usually about 6 months later. Really, what we usually look for is not necessarily an audition winner. The very best player doesn't always get the audition, doesn't always win the job. We want a person that we can work with for the next 20 years. We want somebody that gels well with everybody, that has a good personality, good attitude. It's a plus, and is able to adjust and be flexible to all the changes and the things that come with the Army as well.
As you were talking, I was looking at the audition requirements, and I clicked for the PDF of the Pocket Companion, which has some of your tunes.
At the time, that wasn't available for me. So what I did, I went on YouTube. I went on there on the fifeanddrum.army.mil website, and I found a ton of music listed there that I was able to play along with. Sometimes I had to do some research and find out exactly what tune was on the audition, but I think I found pretty much all of it, and it gave me a really good idea about the style. Style was a big deal when it came to playing with the section. Make sure that I matched right away. And we're really big on time as well. Like, make sure that your time, and you work your audition with a constant metronome, and make sure that your time is really, really good. That helped me out a lot as well. I worked with a metronome. I still work with a metronome for forever. But that really helped me out in my audition, that I had really good time, and I stayed with the section, and it was steady all throughout the audition.
Yeah, I'm looking. I found the 2017 Bugle audition music is on your website, and on a bugle, this is some stuff here.
Yep, that's right. It's and I think it has gotten a lot more intense because the talent that we're getting in nowadays are people with master's degrees, doctorate degrees from various conservatories around the country. Just fantastic players. One of our last hires came from New England Conservatory. He's a fantastic bugle player, or trumpet player in general. And we have people from very diverse backgrounds that are jazz players. We have some classically trained players that solely play in orchestras. We have drum corps background people, as well as wind band type players as well. British brass band players. We have the whole gamut, and I think that's what makes this job such a joy, is that you're always learning from everybody. It's just such a fantastic place to be, and I haven't had a dull day yet. I learn something new almost every day.
So does your literature change much? Do you guys add a lot of literature, or is it pretty standard?
We have a pretty much a standard repertoire. It's a pretty thick book. It's a lot of music, and it all has to be memorized. We recently changed our standard show. I think every 4 years we change our standard show, and in between that, every 4 years in between the even years of that, we change our small team show. But ceremonial missions are usually done with the same music. That's kind of a standard rep, and once you learn it, you just have it, and it's your job to maintain it and make sure that it's still good and ready to go at any given point. There's missions that we show up, and they tell us, okay, well, you're going to be playing a couple of stand-in plays with the show music, the standard show music. And then 2 seconds later, they come back and say, actually, they want an extra 15 minutes, so we're going to add parade sequence 3 and parade sequence 4. So you better have that ready. And most of these sequences, like the parade tunes, for example, it's not just one tune, put your horns down and the drum play. It's at least 4 or 5 tunes in one sequence, and there's 4 different sequences. So there's a lot of music to memorize, and it's something that growing up, I was very fortunate that I worked at Disney World in Orlando as a musician, and all that music was memorized. When I was in Blast, all that music was memorized, and I had a good advantage where I knew how to memorize music. So if that's something that you're uncomfortable with, take a moment to memorize that concerto that you've been working on. Take a moment to memorize an etude, and get your brain working in that way to help you do your very best. And there will be some music in your audition that will have to be memorized. So they'll give you a good, at least a good step into what our regular world would be.
I'd like to take a short break from our episode to invite you to listen to my music at markjconner.com. I am always seeking opportunities for collaboration. If you are interested in commissioning a new piece of music for me, having me work with your students in person or via Skype, or to just say hello, please drop me a line at markjconner@gmail.com or through the contact form on my website. So, Francis, I'm going to ask you the questions that I ask all of my guests, and these are sort of you individually. You don't have to speak for the Army necessarily here. You've had a career with a lot of different things, and so you've seen competition in music. Where do you draw the line, especially in music education, between healthy and unhealthy competition?
This is a great question, something that I actually struggled with when I was a band director, because I am very competitive by nature. However, I feel that it is important to have some competition to help motivate some students, not all of them, but it helps motivate some students to have a goal. And for example, if you're competing in a marching band realm, I think it's important that if you do compete, it's a great product. So you set up your students with the very best tools so they can be very successful. So I was very fortunate to be at a school where I had at my disposal great arrangers close by. I had a great staff, and my students were learning things that were relevant not only for marching band, but they were very relevant to what we do in the concert band. So going back and seeing what I did, I wish I would have, because all of these things cost so much money to a band program to be very competitive and be relevant. I would maybe do it more of a every other year type of thing. So let's say my budget was $80,000 for a season, for a marching season, that went into staff arrangements and things like that. On the opposite, the next year, I would spend that money more in clinicians from the local orchestras for commissioning works, to exposing the kids in various different chamber groups and literature. I think as long as you have a good balance where none of your groups are suffering, in the sense that marching band year-round type of thing, or concert band year-round thing, where if your students are being exposed to all of it, I think it's healthy to have some competition in a program. I think back then, because I was so competitive, I probably could have done a little less competitive marching band and more of spending that money in ways that could enrich my students' musical career at the time in ways that they were not expecting. Bringing in early music ensembles, bringing in the local, even pop ensembles that are great, talking about music business, bringing in those kind of people to work with my students as well, not just the stock marching band, jazz band, wind ensemble crew. Because I think a lot of students leave the high school thinking that that's all there is. And the music world is very, very large, especially nowadays with all the technology. There's a lot of more opportunities for students to be diverse in their music backgrounds. And I think if a program focuses just on competitive marching band or competitive anything else, it can quickly lose the opportunities that would be a huge enrichment for your students' musical career during their high school program.
All right. So how do you find work-life balance as a musician?
I am very fortunate that my wife grew up with a musical family. Her dad played tuba and is actually an audio engineer in the Bay Area in California. And she understands a lot of what I have to do. Basically, right now, I must maintain my chops on my trumpet and my bugle. So I try to do as much as I can at work, but there's times that I have to do a lot of work at home personally to keep up with my trumpet playing. And as long as that I balance the two where I can have enough time with my kids and being a good husband and a dad, then I feel that's a good way to feel fulfilled and balanced. Anytime that I feel that I'm working too much on the trumpet or bringing work home, and then my kids are not getting their love that like they should, then that's a red flag for me, and I have to stop what I'm doing and just spend time and make sure that I'm getting joy out of just being with my family and putting the horn down for a minute. And it's hard because I love playing music. I love listening. I love studying it. I love studying scores. And there's times I just have to put that down and love just maintaining myself physically and be able to spend more time with the family and give them the love that they deserve. Because a lot of times, especially in the Army, the soldiers, especially musicians, don't do all the sacrificing. It's basically your family does all the sacrifice. When you're trying to be home for a soccer game, or you're trying to be home for a birthday and you have a mission out of state or something like that, they're the ones sacrificing. So anytime that I get to be home and be completely engulfed with my family, I feel that's a good way to balance everything.
Is there a mandatory retirement for the old guard?
There's it depends on what rank you are. Most of us do about 20 years and we're out after that. Some of us, depending if you get promoted to Sergeant First Class and Sergeant Major or Master Sergeant, the Army will give you an extra few years to stay in the Army. However, my last commander, where I was first stationed at Fort Hood when I first joined the Army in Texas, she was the longest serving female in the Army, and she served a total of 43 years. So depending if you're a commissioned officer or a warrant officer or enlisted, the Army will give you a certain range of years to be with the Army.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it must be interesting to kind of think about what's going to happen next.
Oh, yeah. I think about it all the time. I think about going back to teaching, and then I think twice. And I love teaching just as much, but I think about how am I going to feel when I'm 55 when I retire. Am I going to be the same energetic band director that I was, or am I going to be way more calm and just want to just take a back seat and be like a third band director in Texas or something like that? I think when I do retire, I may go back to teaching in some kind of way or form, because I feel very passionate about that. I love seeing a kid's face when that light bulb turns on right up on top of their heads. It's great.
So this is a broad question, and I get many different answers, but what are the challenges facing music education as we move forward into the 21st century?
Well, as a music educator, I believe obviously the thought that music is not important in life or in the future of students or any of that, I think that's the huge challenge. With that comes budget cuts and come programs that are just being dissipated. I think that's a huge challenge. Also, when I was a teacher, one of the reasons that I got out of teaching was because I felt like my job entailed of about 25% making music, which was obviously what I was super passionate about, and then 75% of everything else, the paperwork, the administration meetings, figuring out a budget and everything else. And it wasn't pure teaching, which is part of the reason that I really love teaching in a drum corps scenario. Because when you're touring with a drum corps and you're teaching, you're just purely teaching. And that's it. That's your whole job all day long. It's just actually teaching. And I feel like there's so many other things, standardized testing, like I said, administrative duties and everything else. I get into the job of a music educator that can really burn somebody out. But if you keep artistry and music as your main goal, you're always bound to succeed with your program. And whatever happens with the cuts and everything else, and the way that things are shaping out nowadays, that everything's geared towards different parts of the academic spectrum, I feel that if you still keep music as your main mission in any program, your program will always be relevant and necessary, which hopefully will not lead to any kind of cut in your program or your budget or anything that gets in the way of you making music with your students.
If you can go back to maybe your high school graduation or your early college years, do you have any advice you'd give your younger self?
Oh, man, this is a tough one, too. I believe I would try to take practicing a lot more seriously. I think practicing for me was like something that unfortunately, I felt like it was something that I had to do because my trumpet teacher wanted me to do. And a lot of times I could just get by and show up to a rehearsal, and I didn't see the value in it. So I think I would tell myself to take pride in your practicing just as much as you do in your performing, because one success in practicing leads to a huge success in your performance, and a lot less nerves and a lot less hacking and everything else that sometimes you fear in your performance. So I would say definitely take more pride, take your time, and really have fun taking that time to make good music while you're in a practice room. I think that's a huge change that I made as an older performer and artist. Every time that I do practice, I really try to have fun with it and try to make an artistic moment at least once through my practice session.
So this question seems a little bit morbid, but I ask it because if I ask what's your favorite work, then people tend to edit their answers. And so what I want is kind of your honest answer about what you value. And if you had a choice, what would be the final work that you'd perform?
I'm a huge fan of Percy Granger, and I wouldn't even want to do it on trumpet. I would like to conduct Colonial Song. It's been one of my favorite works of his. I'm not sure why, but I feel that song every time that I listen to it or every time I hear a group perform it. I felt like there was so much heart put into that hopefully if it was a great performance, that it just always moves me every single time. And I would love to be in front of a great group conducting it. If that was my last performance, I'll die a very happy man.
Okay. Is there anything coming up that you'd like to share or promote?
Yeah, actually, we have a few things coming up. As you said before, the Twilight Tattoos are a great way to come check out the Fife and Drum Corps and see the pageantry that involves in the history of the Army as a one big package and show that we do every Wednesday at Fort Myer in Arlington. Around 7 p.m. Depending on how many people come out, we may have two shows. But most of the times, the shows are 7 p.m. The Twilight Tattoo is a great way to also meet the soldiers around the field and to meet the Fife and Drum Corps. At the end of the show, we do a really great meet and greet. We take pictures, we answer questions, and we'll even do a little petting zoo with our horns for a little while. And you'll get to see and hear the drum corps featured in all the sections there. Yeah, absolutely. They're going to love it. It's a really, really fun time. There's a lot of big guns being shot, and that's also kind of a cool thing. The next thing that we have coming up is the National Muster. That's going to be in Plainville, Connecticut, which is on July 13th through 15th. We will be performing a full 22-person show there, the standard show, the new version of our show. So if you haven't seen the new standard show, come out to Plainville, Connecticut, and check us out there. And lastly, August 17th, we have the Capitol Steps concert right at the Capitol. That should be around, I believe it's at 7 p.m. as well. And that is August 17th at the Capitol Step here in Washington, D.C. That should be a really great concert where we're going to feature not only the full Fife and Drum Corps, but we'll also feature the historical groups, including the the historical flutes, the historical Baroque trumpets, the drum group, and possibly the modern trumpet ensemble.
You mentioned the National Muster in Plainville. I want to give a shout out to Ken Bagley, who's one of my longtime listeners. He's a band director in Bristol, Connecticut.
Oh man, great! I hope I get to meet him. That'll be a great treat.
How can people get in touch with you?
The Old Guard is on the website. The Old Guard Fife and Drum course on our website, fifeanddrum.army.mil. And for me personally, you can always find me on Facebook. If you search Franqui Trumpet or Francis Franqui, last name is Franqui. You can find me there on Facebook, and feel free to send me messages and ask me questions about auditioning, about my experience in the Army music program, regular music program, regular band program, and also in the Fife and Drum Corps. I'm very open to that. For me, it has been such a good experience. I'm not trying to sell you on anything, but I would like to talk about it and share my experience with you. So you can find us there, either in the fifeanddrum.army.mil website. On that website, you can actually find a few links where you can book us if you want us to come out to your event. And then on my Facebook page, you can always find me there, Franqui Trumpet on Facebook, or Francis Franqui on Facebook as well.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. So thank you so much for your time.
Mark, it's been great. Great to talk to you.